By the age of 30, Alexander the Great had conquered the known world. He had never lost a battle. He ruled an empire that stretched from Greece to India, from Egypt to Afghanistan. He was worshipped as a god by millions of people. But on June 10th, 323 BC, Alexander lay dying in Babylon. He was 32 years old. His empire was crumbling. His generals were already plotting to divide his conquests among themselves. The man who had everything died with nothing but regret. This is the story of the greatest military genius who ever lived, and how unlimited ambition became his ultimate curse. What would you sacrifice to rule the world if you knew the world would never be enough? Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedonia. His father was Philip II, a brilliant king who had transformed Macedonia from a backward kingdom into a military powerhouse. His mother was Olympias of Epirus, a fierce princess who claimed descent from Achilles himself. From the moment of his birth, Alexander was destined for greatness. But greatness, his parents would teach him, was something you had to seize with your own hands. Philip was rarely home. He was always fighting, always conquering, always expanding Macedonia's borders. When he was present, he was a demanding father who expected perfection from his son. Olympias was even more intense. She filled Alexander's head with stories of gods and heroes. She told him he was descended from Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived. She whispered that his real father might not be Philip at all, but Zeus himself. Alexander believed her. By age 7, Alexander could ride any horse, fight with sword and spear, and recite Homer's Iliad from memory. He wasn't just learning to be a prince, he was learning to be a legend. When Alexander was 13, Philip hired the greatest teacher in the world, Aristotle. For 3 years, Aristotle taught Alexander philosophy, science, medicine, and politics. But more importantly, he taught him to think strategically, to see patterns, to understand that knowledge was the ultimate weapon. Aristotle showed Alexander maps of the known world. He told him about the Persian Empire, the richest and most powerful kingdom on earth. He described India, a land of spices and elephants and unimaginable wealth. Alexander studied those maps obsessively. He memorized every mountain range, every river, every city. He was planning his conquests before he even had an army to lead. At age 16, Alexander got his first taste of real power. Philip left him as regent of Macedonia while he campaigned in the south. A Thracian tribe rebelled, thinking they could take advantage of the king's absence. They were wrong. Alexander crushed the rebellion with ruthless efficiency. He didn't just defeat the Thracians, he founded a city on their ruins and named it Alexandropolis. At 16, he was already thinking like an emperor. When Philip returned, he was both proud and worried. His son was brilliant, but he was also ambitious, dangerously ambitious. The tension between father and son came to a head in 337 BC. Philip took a new wife, a young Macedonian noblewoman named Cleopatra Eurydice. Olympias was furious, Alexander was insulted. At the wedding feast, Philip's new father-in-law made a toast. He prayed that Philip and Cleopatra would produce a legitimate heir to the throne. Alexander exploded. He threw his cup at the man and shouted, "What am I then, a bastard?" Philip drew his sword and lunged at his son, but he was drunk and stumbled, falling to the floor. Alexander looked down at his father with contempt. "Here is the man who would cross from Europe to Asia," he said, "and he cannot even cross from one couch to another." In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated at his daughter's wedding. A bodyguard named Pausanias stabbed him to death in the theater of Aegae. Alexander was 20 years old when he became king. His enemies expected him to be weak, inexperienced, easy to manipulate. They were catastrophically wrong. Alexander's first act as king was to secure his throne. He executed anyone who might challenge his rule. He crushed rebellions in Thrace and Illyria with lightning speed. When the Greek city-states tried to break free from Macedonian control, Alexander marched south and destroyed Thebes as an example to the others. 30,000 Thebans were sold into slavery. The city was razed to the ground. The message was clear. Alexander was not his father. He was something far more dangerous. With Greece secured, Alexander turned his attention to the east. The Persian Empire had been Macedonia's enemy for generations. Philip had planned to invade Persia, but had been killed before he could begin. Alexander would finish what his father had started. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 35,000 men. It was a relatively small army by Persian standards, but it was the most professional fighting force the world had ever seen. Alexander's first major battle was at the Granicus River. The Persian satraps had assembled a large army to stop the Macedonian invasion before it could gain momentum. Alexander didn't just defeat them, he annihilated them. The battle established Alexander's reputation as a military genius. He didn't fight like other generals, safely commanding from the rear. He led from the front, charging into the thickest fighting, inspiring his men through personal example. His soldiers would follow him anywhere, because they knew he would never ask them to face dangers he wouldn't face himself. After Granicus, Persian resistance in Western Asia Minor collapsed. City after city opened its gates to Alexander. He was seen not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. But the real test was yet to come. In 333 BC, Alexander faced Darius III, the King of Kings, at the Battle of Issus. Darius commanded over 100,000 men. Alexander had fewer than 40,000. The odds didn't matter. Alexander studied the battlefield like a chess master studying a board. He saw that Darius had made a crucial mistake. He had chosen to fight in a narrow coastal plain that negated his numerical advantage. Alexander attacked at dawn. He led the companion cavalry in a devastating charge that shattered the Persian left flank. When Darius saw Alexander cutting through his bodyguard, heading straight for him, the King of Kings panicked and fled. The Persian army collapsed. Darius abandoned his family, his treasure, and his dignity in his desperate flight. Alexander had defeated the most powerful empire in the world. But instead of being satisfied, he was hungry for more. He marched south into Syria and Palestine. He besieged Tyre for 7 months, building a causeway across the sea to reach the island city. When Tyre finally fell, Alexander crucified 2,000 defenders and sold 30,000 into slavery. He was becoming more ruthless with each victory. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a pharaoh and declared the son of the god Ammon. The priests told him what he wanted to hear, that he was divine, that his conquests were blessed by the gods, that he was destined to rule the world. Alexander founded Alexandria, the city that would bear his name for over 2,000 years. But he didn't stay to enjoy his triumph. He was already planning his next campaign. In 331 BC, Alexander met Darius for the final time at Gaugamela. This time, Darius had chosen the battlefield carefully. The plain was vast and flat, perfect for his chariots and cavalry. He commanded over 250,000 men. Alexander had 47,000. The Battle of Gaugamela was Alexander's masterpiece. He used a complex tactical maneuver that drew the Persian forces out of position, then struck at the exact moment when Darius was most vulnerable. Once again, Darius fled. This time, he would never stop running. Alexander was now the undisputed master of the Persian Empire. He could have returned to Macedonia as the greatest conqueror in history. His men expected him to. Instead, Alexander announced that the campaign was just beginning. He chased Darius across the Iranian plateau. When Darius was murdered by his own satraps, Alexander wept. He had wanted to defeat his rival in battle, not see him assassinated by traitors. But Darius's death didn't end Alexander's ambitions. If anything, it inflamed them. Alexander declared himself the heir to the Persian throne. He began wearing Persian dress and adopting Persian customs. He demanded that his Macedonian nobles prostrate themselves before him, as Persian subjects did before their king. His men were horrified. They had followed Alexander to defeat Persia, not to become Persians themselves. The first serious opposition came from Philotas, the son of Alexander's most trusted general, Parmenion. Philotas was accused of treason and executed. Alexander then ordered the murder of Parmenion himself, the man who had served his family for decades. Alexander was becoming paranoid, suspicious of anyone who might challenge his authority. But he wasn't finished conquering. In 327 BC, Alexander invaded India. He crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and descended into the Indus Valley. He defeated King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes, adding war elephants to his army. But India broke something in Alexander's men. They had been fighting for 8 years. They had marched 22,000 miles. They had conquered an empire larger than any in history. They wanted to go home. At the Hyphasis River, Alexander's army mutinied. For the first time in his life, Alexander's men refused to follow him. Alexander raged. He threatened. He pleaded. He locked himself in his tent for 3 days, hoping his men would change their minds. They didn't. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed to turn back. But the retreat became another nightmare. Crossing the Gedrosian desert, Alexander lost more men to heat and thirst than he had lost in all his battles combined. By the time they reached Babylon in 323 BC, Alexander's empire was in chaos. His governors were fighting each other. His treasury was empty. His army was exhausted and demoralized. Alexander began planning new campaigns. He wanted to conquer Arabia. He dreamed of sailing west to discover new lands. He spoke of marching north to conquer the Scythians. His generals were appalled. They had given him everything, and it was never enough. On June 10th, 323 BC, after a night of heavy drinking, Alexander fell ill. For 10 days, he burned with fever. His doctors could do nothing. As he lay dying, his generals asked who should inherit his empire. Alexander's last words were, "To the strongest." Within hours of his death, his empire began to tear itself apart. His generals fought a series of wars that lasted for decades. His family was murdered, his cities were destroyed. The empire that had taken Alexander 13 years to build was gone in less than 13 months. Alexander the Great had conquered the world, but he couldn't conquer his own ambition. He had everything a man could want: power, wealth, glory, immortality, but it was never enough. He always needed more territories to conquer, more enemies to defeat, more worlds to rule. His greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. He couldn't stop. Alexander's military innovations changed warfare forever. He perfected the use of the phalanx, a formation of soldiers with long spears that could break any cavalry charge. But his real genius was in combining different types of troops: heavy infantry, light infantry, cavalry, and siege engines working together as a unified force. His companion cavalry was the elite unit of his army. These were Macedonian nobles who had trained with Alexander since childhood. They fought as a brotherhood, each man willing to die for the others. Alexander led them personally in every charge, sharing their dangers and their glory. But Alexander's greatest weapon wasn't military, it was psychological. He understood that conquering people's minds was more important than conquering their cities. He adopted local customs, married local princesses, and presented himself as a liberator rather than an invader. In Egypt, he became pharaoh. In Persia, he became the king of kings. In India, he was seen as a divine warrior. Alexander didn't just conquer territories, he conquered identities. Alexander's legacy is complex. He spread Greek culture across 3 continents, creating a cosmopolitan civilization that would influence the world for centuries. He founded cities that still exist today. He opened trade routes that connected East and West. But he also left behind a trail of destruction. Millions died in his wars. Ancient cultures were destroyed. Entire peoples were enslaved or displaced. Alexander was a genius, but he was also a monster. He was a liberator and a tyrant. He was a visionary and a destroyer. He achieved immortality, but at a terrible cost. Today, we remember Alexander as one of history's greatest figures, but we should also remember the price of his greatness. Alexander conquered the world in 13 years, but the world conquered him in the end. He died young, alone, and empty. The man who had everything discovered that everything was nothing if you had no one to share it with. Alexander the Great teaches us that there is a difference between success and fulfillment. That conquest is not the same as achievement. That winning everything means nothing if you lose yourself in the process. The greatest military genius in ancient history was also its greatest cautionary tale. He showed us how high human ambition can soar, but he also showed us how far it can fall. Alexander wanted to be remembered forever. He succeeded. But perhaps he should have been more careful about what he wished for. The boy who dreamed of being Achilles became something far more dangerous, a legend that would inspire conquerors for thousands of years. Alexander the Great conquered the known world, but he never conquered the unknown world within himself. And that, perhaps, was his greatest failure of all.